Maya had always sensed the darkness lurking behind the charming facade of her husband, Raj, but nothing had prepared her for the growing storm of his obsession. She tiptoed through the rooms of their spacious yet suffocating house, heart pounding at every creak of the wooden floorboards, aware that even a whisper could betray her presence, as Raj's eyes seemed to pierce through walls and corners alike, and the moments she had once dismissed as possessive attention now felt like warnings etched in the very air she breathed, compelling her to plan in secret an escape route that would take her far from the house she had once considered a sanctuary. Yet each plan was thwarted by her fear of his unpredictable violence and the invisible chains of manipulation that held her tightly, until one night, after pretending to sleep for hours while Raj's heavy footsteps circled the room, she slipped quietly into the shadows, grabbing only a small bag with essentials, and left behind the life she had known, believing that freedom lay somewhere beyond the city streets, unaware that Raj's obsession was not a fleeting storm but a calculated hurricane, and that her every move was being anticipated. The night outside was colder than she had expected, and as she walked along dimly lit lanes, heart racing with the dual thrill of liberation and terror, she failed to notice the figure observing her from the shadows, a presence so silent and patient that it could make her imagine the wind itself was conspiring against her. And as the hours passed and she navigated alleys and side streets, Maya felt a creeping sense of unease, an invisible hand pressing against her back, reminding her that escape was only an illusion. While in the house, Raj sat in his study, a faint, unsettling smile tracing his lips as he whispered to himself, calculating, anticipating, knowing that the night was far from over and that the story of Maya's attempt to flee was just beginning, a grim prelude to the horror that awaited. For sometimes the walls of a house are not made of bricks and mortar, but of obsession, fear, and a love twisted into something unrecognizable. And as the first light of dawn approached, casting long, accusatory shadows across the empty streets, Maya's heart swelled with both hope and dread, unable to comprehend that the true danger was not the city outside, but the man who claimed to love her within. And so she moved, step by step, into the uncertain dawn, unaware that fate had already begun its meticulous and merciless design. A trap laid not with violence, but with patience, not with shouting, but with silence. For the story of Maya and Raj was destined to end not with freedom, but with a chilling tableau that would haunt anyone who heard it, a tale of obsession, escape, and the ultimate betrayal of trust that turns the sanctuary of home into a stage for terror. Maya's sense of fleeting freedom was shattered as she realized the city, with its crowded streets and flickering streetlights, offered no sanctuary. Every turn and alleyway seemed to harbor unseen eyes, and even the faintest sounds made her heart leap as though warning her of imminent danger. While Raj, back in the confines of their supposedly secure home, had discovered her absence almost immediately, a cold fury igniting behind his composed exterior, and he began retracing her possible routes, calling friends and acquaintances under false pretenses, fabricating stories to extract information, each lie carefully constructed to mask the obsession that had turned into a dangerous craving. As he scoured the city, employing a network of contacts whose loyalty he had bought through manipulation, and Maya, unaware of how closely her movements were being tracked, found herself constantly glancing over her shoulder, feeling the weight of a presence that was both invisible and unavoidable. Her plans for a temporary refuge collapsing as the sense of dread grew into a palpable shadow, forcing her to change streets, double back, and hide in abandoned corners where the stench of decay mingled with the cold night air. All the while her mind racing with terrifying scenarios, each one more grotesque than the last. And she wondered if any place could truly keep her safe from a man who had loved her enough to destroy everything she valued, who had convinced her at times that his obsession was affection, and who now transformed into a predator with the meticulous patience of a hunter. As she ducked into an old cafe that had long been closed for the night, hoping the darkness within would shield her. But the fleeting silence was broken by the distant sound of footsteps, deliberate and slow, echoing like a heartbeat, and Maya's breath hitched as she realized the nightmare she had feared was catching up to her. Not with blind luck, but with methodical precision, while Raj, methodically eliminating every possible escape route, whispered promises and threats to himself, a dangerous cocktail of love and malice. And as the city slept under the illusion of safety, to lives intertwined in a deadly dance, one desperate to flee, the other determined to control. A prelude to the horrific events that would culminate in a scene so chilling that it would be whispered about in the city for years. A reminder that obsession, when left unchecked, transforms love into a weapon, and that no shadow is darker than the one cast by a familiar face. Maya's desperate flight led her into a maze of narrow back streets and derelict buildings, each step echoing against graffiti-stained walls, her every nerve taut with anticipation. As the chilling realization settled over her that the city, which once seemed vast and full of possibility, had transformed into a labyrinth designed to trap her, and the shadows themselves appeared to stretch and twist with malicious intent, reflecting the mounting fear in her heart, while Raj, relentless and cunning, had begun piecing together her trail with frightening accuracy, contacting street vendors, taxi drivers, and night shift workers, weaving a web of information that closed in on her like invisible threads. And Maya crouched behind piles of discarded furniture in an abandoned warehouse, felt the walls press closer as the weight of isolation bore down upon her, her thoughts racing through worst-case scenarios, the echo of her own footsteps and ragged breathing seeming almost to betray her location, and every distant sound a dripping pipe, a rat scuttling across broken floorboards, a far-off siren was magnified into a potential harbinger of discovery, compelling her to move silently, cautiously, her mind calculating every risk and escape route in milliseconds. Yet the exhaustion of constant vigilance threatened to weaken her resolve, and as she paused to listen, a faint rustle in the shadows triggered a surge of adrenaline, making her heart pound like a drum in a silent jungle. While elsewhere, Raj, sitting behind the wheel of a dark sedan, scanned the streets with obsessive determination, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly, eyes flicking from one street corner to another, calculating her probable path with unnerving precision. And the thought of her slipping away fueled a dark elation that twisted his love into something sinister, transforming memories of their shared life into fuel for obsession. As the night stretched on with relentless tension, two lives locked in a deadly game of pursuit and evasion, a battle of wits and willpower. And as Maya pressed on through the maze of decay, unaware of the net closing around her, she began to sense a sinister presence following every step, a force patient and unyielding, yet invisible, a terrifying reminder that sometimes the darkest danger comes not from strangers lurking in the night, but from the very person who once held your heart, and as the first hint of dawn approached, casting a ghostly pall over the city's forgotten corners, Maya's mind raced with hope and dread alike, knowing that survival depended not on courage alone, but on the ability to outthink a mind capable of love turned lethal, a cruel calculus of obsession that left no room for error. And as the shadow of Raj's pursuit loomed ever closer, the night became a testing ground for human fear, ingenuity, and the fragile illusion of escape, a stage where one wrong step could transform hope into horror, and where the faintest flicker of freedom could vanish in the blink of an eye, leaving only darkness, fear, and the chilling promise of the inevitable confrontation that would define the fate of both hunter and prey. Maya's flight had brought her to the outskirts of the city, where abandoned factories and overgrown lots created a confusing maze of metal, brick, and shadows, and every sound, the rustling of leaves, the distant howl of a dog, the creak of a corroded gate, seemed amplified into a warning that her pursuer was closer than she dared imagine. While the weight of exhaustion pressed down on her, muscles trembling from hours of relentless running and hiding, hunger gnawed at her stomach, and a sense of helplessness threatened to cloud her mind. Yet, despite the physical and emotional strain, Maya's will to survive burned fiercely, compelling her to push forward, to find any space, any path that might offer temporary safety. And all the while, Raj's obsession had reached a fevered pitch. He had traced her steps through security cameras, called in favors from the criminal elements he had once kept at a careful distance, and even deployed small tracking devices. His methods meticulous, his patience frighteningly exacting. And as Maya paused to catch her breath near a rusted chain-link fence, the city lights behind her fading into memory, she sensed, almost instinctively, the intangible pressure of a shadow looming just beyond her perception, the knowledge that Raj's eyes, if not physically present, were mentally dissecting her every choice, predicting her movements with chilling accuracy. And panic began to creep into her chest, tightening her breath. Yet she could not allow herself to succumb. Not now, when freedom was within a fragile grasp. So she ducked behind an overturned dumpster, listening to the hollow echo of her own heartbeat, trying to steady trembling hands that threatened to betray her position. And in that moment of quiet terror, she realized that escape was no longer merely about distance, but about strategy, about staying several steps ahead of a mind that knew her better than she knew herself. And as Raj's silhouette emerged in the distance, his movements deliberate and controlled, his eyes scanning, calculating, the city itself became a labyrinth of fear, each corner a potential trap, each shadow a possible enemy. And Maya understood that the fight for survival was as much psychological as physical, a battle of nerves against an adversary whose love had mutated into something lethal, whose obsession had become a stalking presence she could not shake. And as the first rays of the morning sun began to pierce through the haze, casting long, accusing shadows over broken pavement and rusted metal. She felt the dual thrill of hope and terror, knowing that her next decisions could mean life or death, freedom or capture, and that every instinct, every ounce of cunning she possessed, would be tested in the hours ahead, because sometimes the most dangerous predators are not wild beasts, but the ones who wear love as a mask. And the only way to survive is to recognize the danger before it is too late, to move in silence, to blend into darkness, and to fight with all the intelligence and courage one can muster against a force determined to reclaim what it believes is rightfully its own, no matter the cost. And as Maya pressed on, heart pounding, lungs burning, and mind racing, the city, once a place of familiarity and comfort, had transformed into an arena of suspense, fear, and the stark reality that survival depended not on hope alone, but on action, stealth, and the unyielding resolve to outsmart a man who had loved her to the point of destruction. Maya's mind raced as she navigated the derelict streets, each corner and alleyway a potential trap, her eyes scanning shadows for the slightest movement, and every unexpected sound, a distant clang of metal, a scurrying animal, a door swinging in the wind, sent her heart hammering in her chest. For she knew that Raj's obsession had escalated beyond mere pursuit, transforming into a calculated hunt. And the thought of him weaving his meticulous network of informants and trackers through the city chilled her to the bone. As she ducked into an abandoned subway tunnel, the stale air thick with decay, the darkness pressing down on her like a living entity, and for a moment, she allowed herself to imagine that the darkness would protect her, conceal her from the relentless predator who had once claimed to love her. Yet the illusion of safety was fleeting, for Maya could feel the psychological weight of being hunted, the paranoia gnawing at her mind, twisting every noise into a potential threat, while Raj, in his unyielding pursuit, had escalated his tactics, reaching out to underground contacts, using a combination of technology, intimidation, and sheer cunning to predict her movements. His obsession turning every thought into a calculation, every memory of Maya into a strategic advantage. And as she navigated the winding tracks, ducking under exposed beams and leaping over debris, Maya realized that survival demanded not only speed and stealth, but an understanding of the predator's mind, the ability to anticipate his next move, and the courage to act decisively under pressure, all while exhaustion threatened to sap her strength, hunger and fatigue gnawing at her resolve. Yet the thought of freedom, however fragile, kept her moving, step by step, in near silence, each heartbeat a drumbeat of tension. And as she paused in a dark alcove to catch her breath, she heard a distant sound, footsteps, echoing off concrete walls in a rhythm that chilled her to the core, a reminder that she was never truly alone, that the shadow of Raj's presence was always closer than she could detect. And in that instant, she realized that the city, once familiar, had become a trap of her own making, a labyrinth where every choice could lead to capture or death. And yet she pressed on, driven by a combination of fear, desperation, and an unyielding will to survive, knowing that the hours ahead would test her mental acuity, her endurance, and her courage to a degree she had never imagined. And that, in this deadly dance between hunter and prey, one misstep could spell the difference between life and a gruesome fate. For Raj's love twisted into obsession, was a weapon as precise and lethal as any blade. And the only hope Maya had lay in outsmarting a man who had studied her heart, her mind, and her every habit, and who would not stop until he had reclaimed what he believed was his, leaving the city streets as silent witnesses to a pursuit as relentless as it was horrifying, a pursuit that would ultimately lead to a confrontation neither could escape. As Maya fled deeper into the city's labyrinthine alleys, a part of her mind kept drifting back to the memories she had tried so hard to suppress. The early days of Raj's charm and tenderness, when his attention had seemed protective rather than predatory, and how those memories now twisted into a cruel irony, reminding her of the depth of obsession that had transformed love into a weapon, while her current reality was a nightmarish maze of fear, every narrow passage and abandoned building carrying the echo of danger, and every unexpected sound-breaking glass, a door slammed by the wind. A distant shout became amplified into a possible signal of Raj's presence, forcing her to duck, to freeze, to calculate each next move with a precision born of desperation. Yet, despite the terror, a small spark of resilience burned within her, compelling her to keep moving, to search for a place of temporary refuge. And as she paused behind a crumbling wall to catch her breath, the city around her seemed to pulse with an eerie sentience, as if the very streets conspired to test her resolve, while Raj, having pieced together more of her route through a combination of obsessive surveillance and manipulation, moved with an unnerving focus, contacting shadowy figures from his past, exploiting favors owed, and turning the urban landscape into a map of pursuit where each potential escape route was already under his control. And Maya, sensing the tightening web of danger, began to realize that survival was no longer about outrunning him but outthinking him, anticipating the moves of a mind that knew her intimately, exploiting every fear, every weakness, every familiar pattern. And the thought of this relentless, calculating pursuit made her shiver. Yet she pressed on, navigating through derelict factories, abandoned lots, and overgrown courtyards, her senses heightened, muscles coiled like springs, as exhaustion and hunger threatened to overwhelm her. But the instinct to survive, sharpened by fear, kept her moving with quiet determination, and in those moments, she began noticing subtle signs, the faint smell of perfume, a shadow that didn't belong, a soft scrape of metal that suggested Raj was closer than she had feared, orchestrating the hunt like a predator stalking prey, patient and methodical, his obsession now fully unmasked as a lethal force. While Maya's mind raced to formulate strategies, to find paths unseen, to use her knowledge of his mind against him, knowing that each second counted and that hesitation could be fatal. And as the night deepened, casting long, twisting shadows across broken pavements and rusted metal, Maya realized that her fight was as much mental as physical. A battle of wits and courage against a man whose love had mutated into a dangerous weapon, and that the next move she made could mean the difference between freedom or a gruesome end, leaving the city itself as a silent witness to the deadly game between a woman desperate to survive and a man who would not stop until he had reclaimed her at any cost. Maya's flight had brought her to a deserted industrial district, where rusting machinery and broken windows painted the city in shades of menace and every step she took seemed to echo louder than the last, reminding her that the shadows themselves were treacherous companions. For she had no illusions. Niraj's obsession was not fleeting but methodical, and the faintest misstep could seal her fate, while the city's labyrinthine streets twisted unpredictably, alleys looping back on themselves, stairways leading to rooftops crumbling under years of neglect, and the sound of distant traffic mocked her with false reassurance as the cold wind sliced through her jacket and made her skin prickle, and she realized that exhaustion was making her senses both sharper and more unreliable at once. Every flicker of movement or shadow interpreted as an imminent threat, and yet she could not stop, could not allow fear to paralyze her. For the knowledge that Raj was somewhere out there, patient and calculating, spurred her forward, using instinct and the scant intelligence of observation to evade detection, while Raj, orchestrating the hunt with a terrifying focus, had begun narrowing down her location, employing both technology and human informants, watching her every likely path, predicting behavior with the precision of a chess master, and every memory of Maya her habits, her fears, her slightest predictable reactions, was a weapon he wielded with cruel efficiency. And as she climbed over piles of debris, ducked through broken doorways, and pressed against walls smeared with years of neglect, the weight of the pursuit pressed on her like a tangible thing, a presence that seemed to breathe down her neck even when no one was there, and Maya's mind spun with contingency plans, each more desperate than the last, calculating routes, entrances, and exits, trying to remain 3 steps ahead of a mind she knew all too well, her thoughts punctuated by the sharp staccato of distant footsteps echoing in empty corridors, or the clatter of metal that could signal Raj's approach. And she realized the psychological terror of being hunted was as punishing as any physical threat. Each second of adrenaline-fueled escape burning itself into memory. And yet, despite the fear, she could feel her determination hardening, a steel-like resolve to survive, to find a refuge, to outsmart the man who had once claimed to love her, transforming every shadow, every creaking sign, every flicker of light into both obstacle and tool, until the night itself seemed complicit in her struggle, a stage upon which predator and prey performed a deadly ballet, each aware of the other's presence and intent. And as she crouched behind a crumbling wall, listening to the faint rhythm of approaching footsteps, Maya knew the stakes had never been higher, that one wrong move could mean capture or worse, and that the labyrinth of the industrial district had become both her prison and her battleground, where fear, cunning, and the instinct for survival would clash in a tense confrontation that would decide whether she would see the next dawn, or whether Raj's twisted love would claim victory in a grim tableau that the city would never forget. Maya's options were dwindling as she pushed deeper into the city's abandoned districts, the darkness thick around her, each alleyway and broken doorway a potential trap. And yet she moved with a precision born of terror, knowing that hesitation could mean capture, while the cold wind carried faint, eerie noises that her imagination twisted into warnings, a symphony of fear designed to keep her on edge. And she was painfully aware that Raj's obsession had transformed into a methodical hunt, as he pieced together her likely paths with meticulous care, coordinating informants, using cameras, and exploiting the city's own infrastructure to corner her like prey in a cage. And Maya, crouched behind a rusted fence, her breath fogging the cold night air, felt the crushing weight of inevitability pressing upon her, yet refused to give in, focusing on every detail, every flicker of light, every possible hiding place, trying to remain invisible while exhaustion threatened to betray her. And as she slipped through an overgrown courtyard, avoiding the sharp temps of broken glass and decayed metal, she realized that her survival depended not only on stealth but on the ability to anticipate a mind she knew all too well. A man who had loved her to the point of destruction, who had studied her habits, her fears, and her instincts, and now used them as weapons to bring her back under his control. While the night around her seemed to pulse with her anxiety, the silence broken only by the distant echoes of the city and the occasional metallic clang that heightened her sense of danger. And as she navigated a labyrinth of rusted containers and abandoned vehicles, Maya could feel the noose tightening, an invisible presence that forced her to move with urgency. Aware that Raj was closing in, yet still unable to predict precisely where or when, and every shadow, every flicker of movement, every sound became a threat and a signal, compelling her to act with an intelligence born of desperation. And as she ducked behind a derelict building, listening intently, she knew that the confrontation was imminent, that the predator she had once loved had orchestrated a trap she could neither see nor avoid completely. And the terror of recognition, the realization that she might be unable to escape, despite her cunning, forced her to keep moving. Her mind a whirlwind of contingency plans, each more audacious than the last. Her body trembling from exertion, yet fueled by the primal need to survive. And as the first hint of dawn threatened to pierce the night, Maya understood that the deadly dance between hunter and prey was reaching its crescendo, that Raj's obsession was about to manifest in its most horrific form, and that the city, silent and indifferent, would bear witness to the culmination of a chase that had transformed love into terror, freedom into a fleeting illusion, and the simple act of survival into a battle against a mind that would not rest until it had reclaimed what it considered its own, leaving Maya poised at the edge of fear, cunning, and the ultimate confrontation that would determine whether she lived or became another tragic chapter in a tale of obsession turned lethal. Maya's exhaustion had reached its limits as she sprinted through the narrow, twisting alleyways of the forgotten district, every muscle screaming in protest, lungs burning with each ragged breath. Yet the primal will to survive propelled her forward, knowing that one misstep could mean capture, while the city around her seemed to conspire with Raj's relentless obsession. Shadows stretching like fingers across crumbling walls and broken pavement, making her second-guess every turn and every flicker of light, as if the environment itself were a trap designed to funnel her into his waiting grasp. And she was acutely aware that Raj's methodical mind was always calculating, predicting, orchestrating each move with the patience and precision of a predator who had once claimed to love her. His knowledge of her habits, her fears, and her instincts turned into a weapon that made every escape route a potential snare, while Maya, fueled by desperation, terror, and adrenaline, leaped over broken fences, ducked through narrow passages, and scaled crumbling stairways, each act an instinctive gamble against a mind that knew her as well as she knew herself. And though panic threatened to cloud her judgment, she forced herself to think 3 steps ahead, anticipating his possible moves, imagining where he would strike next, trying to stay 1 step ahead in a deadly game that had no spectators, no rules, and no mercy. And as the night air bit at her skin and her vision blurred with sweat and fatigue, Maya realized that survival depended not on hope alone but on cunning, stealth, and the ability to exploit even the smallest opportunity, to use shadows, silence, and her intimate knowledge of Raj against him. Yet, as she rounded a corner, the unmistakable outline of his figure appeared in the distance. Movements deliberate, eyes scanning, every step calculated, and a cold shiver ran down her spine as the realization struck that the end game had arrived, that the chase was about to culminate in a confrontation neither could avoid, a deadly collision of obsession and desperation, love twisted into violence, freedom teetering on the edge of annihilation. And Maya, her heart hammering, mind racing, and body trembling from fatigue and fear, crouched behind a stack of abandoned crates, calculating her next move with razor-sharp focus, knowing that the seconds ahead would define her fate, that Raj's obsession had reached a fevered pitch where reason no longer restrained him, and that the city, silent and indifferent, would be witness to the culmination of a pursuit that had transformed night into terror, alleys into arenas, and shadows into agents of fear, as predator and prey prepared for the final act in a story of love corrupted by obsession, a story that would leave its mark on both of them and on the city itself, a chilling reminder that sometimes the most dangerous threats come not from strangers, but from those who once claimed to hold your heart. Maya's desperate flight had finally brought her to the edge of the city, a desolate industrial site where rusting machinery and broken buildings stretched like tombstones under the pale light of the rising sun. And every step she took felt heavier than the last, exhaustion threatening to drag her down as fear gnawed at her mind, while Raj, having tracked her relentless movements with a terrifying precision born of obsession, emerged from the shadows with a calm yet menacing intensity, his eyes cold, calculating, a twisted smile playing at the corners of his lips as he observed the prey who had dared defy him. And in that moment, Maya realized that all her cunning, all her calculated maneuvers, had led her to a trap meticulously orchestrated by the man she had once loved, whose obsession had metastasized into a lethal force that knew no bounds. And as she backed away, searching desperately for an escape route that no longer existed, her mind raced through every contingency, every possible tactic, but the surrounding walls, debris, and fencing formed a cage, a grim stage for the culmination of the deadly chase. And she felt the crushing inevitability of her fate as Raj closed the distance, each step deliberate, predatory, echoing in the hollow space like a judge pronouncing sentence, while Maya's breaths came in shallow, rapid gasps, muscles trembling with fatigue, adrenaline, and terror, and the memory of the life she had once known, the love that had twisted into obsession, the promises that had turned into threats, all collided in her mind as she realized there was no salvation beyond the cruel hands of fate and human obsession. And in a final, horrifying instant, Raj's presence enveloped her, the culmination of years of manipulation, control, and unrelenting fixation, transforming the industrial wasteland into a tableau of horror where freedom, hope, and survival were stripped away, leaving only the grim testament of obsession's lethal power. And as Maya's life ebbed away, her final thoughts were a chaotic blend of fear, regret, and fleeting clarity, a recognition of the danger that had been lurking, not in strangers, but in the intimate knowledge and twisted love of a man who had claimed her heart, while the city around them remained silent, indifferent, bearing witness to the brutal consequences of obsession. And the scene that would later horrify investigators, onlookers, and those who heard her story was one of grotesque precision, a pose frozen in death that spoke of control, cruelty, and a love corrupted into violence. And as authorities would later document the aftermath, noting every detail of the position, the setting, the subtle signs of struggle and calculation, it became painfully clear that Raj's mind had orchestrated not only the pursuit, but the final, chilling statement of his dominance, leaving Maya's life as a haunting reminder that sometimes the most lethal threats emerge from the hearts of those who claim to love us, and that the sanctuary of home can be transformed into a stage for horror when obsession supersedes reason. And as the city slowly awakened, unaware of the tragedy in its shadows, Maya's story became a dark legend, a cautionary tale of desire, control, and the horrifying extent to which love twisted into obsession can destroy. And in that grim silence, the chilling truth remained: freedom is fragile, danger is often intimate, and the most terrifying predators are those whose hearts we once trusted completely.